People always told me I was too trusting. My late wife used to say it with a smile, "Hank, you'd give a stranger the shirt off your back and thank them for the favor." She wasn't wrong. I guess I thought that kind of openness was a virtue. I'm 67 years old, and it took me until last Thanksgiving to understand that some people see generosity as an invitation. My name is Hank. I spent 31 years working for the County Highway Department outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. I started as a crew laborer and retired as a district supervisor. Nothing glamorous but honest work. My wife, Loretta, God rest her soul, passed 4 years ago from ovarian cancer. We had one son together. His name is Todd. Todd is 41 now. He married his wife, Marcy, about 8 years ago. I'll be honest with you. I had a feeling about Marcy from the start. Not a bad feeling, exactly. More like the feeling you get when you're driving and something in your gut tells you to ease off the gas before you even see the curve. I ignored it, because Todd loved her and she made him happy. And after losing Loretta, watching my son be happy was the one thing I held on to. They lived in Nashville for the first few years. Todd was in logistics management, decent salary. Marcy worked in pharmaceutical sales. Good money, nice car, the whole picture. They had a daughter, my granddaughter, Piper. She's 7 now, and she is, without exaggeration, the best thing in my life. When Piper laughs, the whole room changes temperature. That's about 3 years ago. Todd called me on a Tuesday night. I remember it was Tuesday because I had my standing poker game with my neighbors, and I stepped outside to take the call. He told me that the company he worked for was restructuring, that his division was being eliminated. He needed help. He and Marcy had a mortgage in Nashville, 2 car payments, credit card balances he'd never mentioned before. He asked if they could move into my house, temporarily, while he figured things out. My house. Let me tell you about my house. It's a 4-bedroom Craftsman on about 1.5 acres out in Maryville, about 20 minutes south of Knoxville. My father built it in 1961. I grew up in it. Loretta and I raised Todd in it. I've replaced the roof twice, rebuilt the back porch, refinished every floor in that house with my own 2 hands. The county appraiser put it at $340,000 last year, but you couldn't pay me that, or so I thought. That house was never a number to me, it was a life. I said yes without hesitating. Of course I did. That's my son. They moved in that September. At first things were fine. Todd was job hunting, Marcy was still working remotely, and having Piper around made the house feel full in a way it hadn't since Loretta passed. I gave them the master bedroom. I moved into the smaller room down the hall without being asked, without even thinking twice about it. It was their comfort that mattered. But I noticed things. Small things at first. The way Marcy would look around the house sometimes, not with warmth, but with calculation, like she was appraising it. One afternoon I came in from the garden and she was standing in the front room talking on the phone, and when she heard me, she lowered her voice and walked toward the back. I didn't think much of it. Todd found a new job within a few months. Good position, better pay than before, with a distribution company in Knoxville proper. Things seemed to stabilize. But they didn't move out. I didn't bring it up. I told myself it was practical. They were saving money, rebuilding, getting back on their feet. I gave them space. I tried not to be in the way. That's when the requests started. The first one was Todd asking to borrow $8,000. He said Marcy's car needed to be replaced and they didn't want to drain their savings. I wrote the check. I told him it was a gift, not a loan. I didn't want money between us. 3 months later, Marcy came to me herself. She was pleasant about it, even a little warm in a way she usually wasn't. She said they were thinking about starting a small business, a boutique fitness studio. She had contacts in the wellness space, great opportunity. Could I help with startup costs? $20,000. I said I'd think about it. Loretta's voice was in my head. Hank, you'd give a stranger the shirt off your back. But I wrote the check anyway. I told myself it was an investment in my son's future, in Piper's future. The fitness studio never opened. When I asked about it 6 months later, Marcy said the location fell through. Todd changed the subject. I let it go. By the second year, I had given them a total of somewhere around $46,000. I know that number precisely because I'm the kind of man who keeps records. I always have been. Comes from 3 decades of county budgets and crew timesheets. I had a spiral notebook in my desk drawer where I logged every transfer, every check, every cash I handed Todd on a Thursday morning when he said he was short for the week. I wasn't keeping score. I just needed to know where things stood. What I didn't know was where I stood. I found out on a Wednesday night in early November. I'd gone to bed early. I do that sometimes when my knee is bothering me. The old injury from a job site back in '04. I took some ibuprofen and went to lie down around 9. I hadn't been asleep long when I woke up needing a glass of water. The house was quiet except for the television in the living room. I could hear Marcy's voice, then Todd's, softer. I wasn't trying to listen. I was walking down the hall in the dark. Then I heard Marcy say my name. I stopped. She said, and I will remember these exact words until the day I die, she said. After the holidays, Hank needs to go. I mean it this time, Todd. We've been going in circles for months. This is our house now, not his. He can go to Evergreen Gardens over in Alcoa. It's a decent place. They take Medicare. And frankly, Hank would probably be happier around people his own age. I stood there in the dark hallway in my own house, in my father's house, and I heard my son say, "I know, you're right. We'll talk to him after Thanksgiving." I didn't make a sound. I turned around and walked back to my room, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. I want to be honest with you about what happened inside me in those minutes. I've heard people say that when something like this happens, they feel rage. Hot, immediate rage. I didn't. What I felt was something colder and heavier, like stepping into a pond in October and realizing the bottom is deeper than you thought. Grief and clarity arriving at the same time. I wasn't going to cry about it, and I wasn't going to confront anyone. I was going to think. I got up early the next morning, before 5, before anyone else was awake. I made coffee and I sat at the kitchen table and I opened my spiral notebook and I looked at the numbers, $46,000. I thought about the fitness studio that never opened. I thought about the car payments and the credit card balances Todd had mentioned 3 years ago that had apparently never resolved themselves. I thought about the way Marcy looked at this house like she was already measuring it for new furniture. And I thought about my daughter-in-law saying, "This is our house now." That was the sentence that settled it for me. Not because it made me angry, it did, but that wasn't what moved me. It was the simple legal incorrectness of it. This house was never in their name. It was mine, my name, my deed, my family's land. And they had been living in it, eating at its table, sleeping in its rooms, and apparently planning to manage me out of it the way you'd manage a vendor relationship. I decided that I would not wait until after Thanksgiving to have a conversation. I would not give them the chance to script whatever gentle, diplomatic removal they were planning. I would instead take control of the only thing I actually had control over, my property. The morning after I heard that conversation, I called my attorney. His name is Bart, and I've known him since before Todd was born. He handled our will, our property transfer when my father passed, everything. I told him what I'd heard and what I wanted to do. He told me to come in that Friday and we'd talk through options. I also called a realtor, Beverly Carter. No, actually, let me correct myself. I called a realtor I'd met at my neighbor's barbecue 2 summers before. A woman named Claudette, no. Her name was Gail. Gail Pittman, out of a Century 21 office in Maryville. I'd liked her immediately when we'd met. Sharp, no nonsense, didn't waste words. I called her on a Thursday morning while Todd was at work and Marcy had taken Piper to preschool, and I told her I wanted to talk about listing the house. Gail came out that afternoon. She walked through every room, took notes, asked me about the recent updates. The new HVAC I'd put in 2 years prior, the kitchen renovation from 2019, the hardwood floors, the detached garage. She told me, given the current market in Blount County, she thought the house could list at $375,000 and likely sell at or near asking within 30 days. I asked her if she could move quickly. She said she could have paperwork ready by the following week. Meanwhile, I had my meeting with Bart. He walked me through everything carefully. The house was entirely in my name, no liens, no complications. Loretta and I had owned it outright since 2009. There was no legal mechanism by which Todd and Marcy had any claim to it, regardless of how long they'd been living there. Tennessee landlord-tenant law does allow for occupants to establish certain rights over time, but given the circumstances and the lack of any formal lease agreement, Bart felt confident that a standard notice to vacate would be legally sound, especially if I intended to sell. He also asked me about the money I'd given them. I showed him my notebook. He said the logged amounts with corresponding dates could be relevant if things became contested, but he didn't think they would. He said, and this stuck with me, "Hank, you're the aggrieved party here, not them. Don't let them frame it any other way." I told him I had no intention of letting them frame anything. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved carefully and quietly. I behaved at dinner the way I always had. I asked Todd about work. I helped Piper with her homework. I grilled chicken on Sunday afternoons the way I've done for 20 years. I was pleasant with Marcy. I smiled when she smiled. I didn't give a single thing away. At the same time, I was documenting. Not in a dramatic way. I wasn't setting up cameras or anything like that. But I started keeping a second notebook, a daily log of the household arrangement. Who was present, what was said, any requests made. I did this at Bart's suggestion just to create a clear record of the living situation. I also quietly moved the things that mattered to me most. My father's toolbox went to my neighbor Roy's garage, a box of Loretta's jewelry and keepsakes. I brought those to my sister's house over in Lenoir City. The photo albums, the paperwork, my personal documents. I did this in small amounts over several weekends, just loading things into my truck when I went out for errands. Nobody noticed, or if they did, nobody said anything. I signed the listing agreement with Gail on the 14th of November. The house went officially on the market the week before Thanksgiving. I want to be clear about something. I knew that selling this house would hurt me too. This was my father's land. This was where Loretta and I had spent the best years of our lives. I was not making this decision without grief. On the night I signed the paperwork, I sat on the back porch for about an hour in the cold, and I talked to Loretta like I sometimes do, just quietly in my head. I told her I was sorry. I told her I thought she'd understand. I thought about the way she used to stand at that kitchen window in the mornings and watch the deer come out of the tree line at the edge of the property. But I also knew, and this is something I've come to understand late in life, that a home is not just walls and land. A home is what happens inside it, and what had been happening inside mine, in the dark and in whispers, was not something I was willing to preserve. The market moved faster than Gail expected. We had 2 showings the first weekend, and by the Monday before Thanksgiving we had an offer. A couple from Knoxville. He was a retired teacher. She'd just taken a position at the hospital system. Their offer came in at $368,000. I countered at $375,000. They accepted within 4 hours. I did not tell Todd and Marcy. Thanksgiving that year was a strange thing. I cooked most of it myself. I always have. Turkey, cornbread dressing, sweet potato casserole, green beans with ham the way Loretta used to make. Marcy brought a store-bought pie. We sat around the table, the 4 of us, and Piper talked about her kindergarten class and the paper turkey she'd made, and I watched my son and his wife move through that meal without any idea that the ground beneath them had already shifted. I watched Marcy help herself to seconds and talk about their plans to renovate the back bedroom into a proper home office eventually, and I sat there and I passed the rolls, and I said, "Sounds nice," and I meant none of it. After Thanksgiving, I waited 10 days. I wanted to be sure the sale was on solid footing. The inspection was completed. The buyers had secured financing. We were moving toward closing. When Bart confirmed we were clear to proceed, I asked him to help me draft a formal notice to vacate. Tennessee law requires a minimum 30-day notice for occupants who haven't signed a lease, though in some situations more notice is appropriate. I gave Todd and Marcy 60 days. I wanted to be fair even now. That's not weakness. That's just who I am. On a Sunday morning in early December, before anyone else was awake, I put 2 envelopes on the kitchen table. One addressed to Todd, one to Marcy. Then I made coffee and I sat down and I waited. Todd came downstairs first, the way he always does, barefoot, looking for the coffee pot. He saw the envelopes. He looked at me. He picked his up and opened it. I watched him read it. I watched his face change. He said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "It's a notice to vacate. The house is under contract. Closing is set for January 22nd. He stared at me. He said, "You're selling the house?" I said, "I am. I've already sold it, really. The paperwork is done." Then Marcy came downstairs, and Todd handed her the envelope before she even reached the bottom step, and I watched her read it, and I watched something move across her face. Something that looked, for just a moment, like the expression of someone who realizes they miscalculated. What followed was about 20 minutes of conversation that I won't recount in full because most of it was noise. There was anger. Marcy's voice went sharp and cold, words like blindsided and betrayal, and after everything we've built here. Todd was quieter, more confused than angry at first, and then somewhere in the middle of it he said, "Dad, where are you even going to go? I had already arranged that." I want people to understand I wasn't acting out of desperation or spite. I had a plan. My sister and her husband have a guest cottage on their property in Lenoir City, a proper little 2-bedroom place they'd built for her mother-in-law years ago. They'd been offering it to me since Loretta died, and I'd always said I wasn't ready. I called them 2 weeks before that Sunday morning. The cottage was ready. I also want to be honest. I had spoken to an attorney about Piper. That was the hardest part of all of this. Not the money, not the house, not the confrontation. Piper. I was not going to let whatever happened between the adults in this house affect my relationship with my granddaughter. Bart had made clear that as a grandparent in Tennessee, I had standing to pursue visitation rights if necessary, and I had filed the appropriate paperwork just in case, quietly, carefully, not as a weapon but as a protection. When Marcy said in the middle of that Sunday morning, "Don't think for a second you're going to have access to Piper after this," I told her calmly that she should speak with her own attorney before making statements like that. The color changed in her face. Todd looked at her. Then he looked at me. And something shifted in my son in that moment. I could see it, the way you can see a person recalculate in real time. I don't know what went through his mind, but he stopped defending her, and he sat down, and he didn't say anything else for a while. I moved out of the house over the following 2 weekends. Most of my things were already gone. I'd done that quietly over the previous month. What remained was furniture and household items, most of which I left. It was their furniture as much as mine by then, and I didn't want to fight over a dining room table. The closing was on January 22nd, just as scheduled. I sat across the table at the title company in Maryville, and I signed my name, and I handed over the keys to my father's house, and I received a check for $371,500, minus closing costs and real estate commission, which left me with $341,000 in change. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of that title company for about 15 minutes before I drove away. I thought about my father building that house. I thought about coming home from school as a kid and smelling supper from the end of the driveway. I thought about the night Todd was born and driving Loretta home from the hospital and pulling into that driveway and thinking, this is everything. I thought about all of it, and then I put the truck in drive and I went to my sister's cottage in Lenoir City, and my brother-in-law had a fire going in the wood stove, and my sister had made a pot of soup, and I sat down at a table where I was welcome. Todd called me 3 times in January. I didn't answer the first 2 calls. The third time I picked up. He was different on the phone, quieter. He asked how I was. He asked about the cottage. He said he was sorry, and he said it plainly, without conditions or qualifications, which was the only version of sorry I had any interest in hearing from him. I told him I forgave him, because I do. I told him I would always be his father. I told him that what had happened was going to take time to work through, and that I expected him to figure out what he was going to do about his marriage, because I couldn't do that for him. He said he knew. He was quiet for a moment, and then he asked if he could bring Piper to see me that weekend. I said yes. Piper came on a Saturday morning in late January, just her and Todd. Marcy did not come. Piper wore her puffy pink coat and her boots with the light-up soles, and when she came through the door of the cottage, she ran to me and grabbed me around the waist the way 7-year-olds do, with their whole bodies, and she said, "Grandpa, your new house is so cozy," and I held on to her, and I laughed. There are people who would call what I did revenge. I've thought about that. I don't think it was revenge, exactly. Revenge is when you want the other person to suffer. That wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was to not be managed out of my own life by people who had decided I was a problem to be solved. What I wanted was to make a decision, a real one, with real consequences, before someone else made it for me. Loretta used to say that dignity is the one thing nobody can take from you. I believe that now more than I ever did. The money from the house is in a trust. Some of it I've earmarked for Piper's college. I had an attorney set up a 529 plan in her name, funded and protected, in my control until she turns 18. The rest is invested conservatively. I have my pension from the county, my Social Security, my sister's cottage for a nominal monthly amount, and I am, if I'm being completely honest with you, more comfortable and more at peace than I have been in years. I still live in the cottage in Lenoir City. My brother-in-law and I go fishing on Saturday mornings when the weather holds. I have a small garden plot where I'm growing tomatoes and sweet peppers this spring. I watch the Tennessee Vols games on a television I bought myself with money I earned myself, in a home where nobody whispers about me after the lights go out. Todd and I are rebuilding, slowly. It's real work, not easy's work, and I don't know how it ends. But he calls. He brings Piper. Last month, he came alone one evening, just to sit on the porch and talk, and we stayed out there past dark talking about his mother, about the house, about what he wished had gone differently. I didn't tell him everything I'd felt that November night in the hallway. There's a version of the truth that heals and a version that just wounds, and I'm old enough to know the difference. What I'll tell you is this. I turned 67 in March. My sister made a chocolate cake, and Piper made me a card with a drawing of what she said was me and her fishing, though it looked more like 2 orange rectangles near a blue squiggle. I put it on the refrigerator where I can see it from my kitchen table. That card is the only decoration I need.